Kamara. In my day job, I'm the Director of Mission Support for the missions in Somalia. Today, I'm addressing you as a member of the Secretary General's Task Force on Addressing Racism and Promoting Dignity for All in the United Nations, and also the chair of the subsidiary working group on staffing and career progression. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the first of a series of global webinars on what is racism and how does it manifest in the workplace and what you can do. I'm pleased to note that there are over 1,000 colleagues registered for this event. Today's event is part of a campaign to raise awareness and take action on this important issue. And the event is taking place simultaneously in English and French for the United Nations personnel in all duty stations. Before I run through my introductory remarks and present our guest speaker, I'd like to outline a few house rules to ensure we get a good exchange. We welcome all views and ideas, and because this is a difficult and sometimes emotional topic, I would like to emphasize the importance of listening to and respecting the views of all colleagues. Please use the chat box to post your questions, comments, or ideas. Time permitting, we will allow some questions at the end of the presentation. Colleagues, last year, the Secretary General acknowledged that racism and racial discrimination exist in the United Nations. In making this declaration, a profound part of his speech stressed that racism is a vicious global pandemic that violates the Charter and debases the core values of our organization, that it is dangerous, ugly, and is everywhere. He stressed how racism perpetuates inequality, oppression, and marginalization, and that our duty as responsible global citizens is to eradicate it, condemn it without reservation and without qualification. He also committed to addressing this issue. He then established the Anti-Racism Task Force to develop a long-term strategic action plan that will embed an anti-racist culture in the organization. And part of this is a campaign to increase awareness and take appropriate action. The task force is chaired by Ms. Catherine Pollard, the Under-Secretary General of the MSPC. Many are working towards achieving this goal and this SG's vision. We know that many remain skeptical that there will be change. My personal view is that these dialogues, such as this event, are a huge step in the right direction, and they do help us identify the issue, disrupt them, and ultimately hold to account those responsible. A fair question is how we address racism in the workplace. First, it is imperative we have a common understanding of what racism is and how it manifests in the organization, and then how it affects those who experience it, and finally, what we can do to address it individually and collectively. Every one of us have a role to play. I hope most of you choose to actively embrace this role and push change. Our keynote speaker today is Ms. Mary Waceke Thongoh. She's a consultant with the task force. She's a recognized corporate leader with over 21 years of experience in leading business and cultural transformation change and supporting diversity and inclusion goals in both private and public sectors. She will discuss what racism is, how it manifests in the workplace, and provide insights into how we can foster an anti-racist workplace. So without further ado, a very warm welcome to Mary. The floor is now yours, Mary. Thank you.
Welcome, colleagues, to this global webinar on race and racism and dignity for all at the workplace. We will start by doing a few poll questions around what is race, what is racism. And over to you, Marinette, to take us through the Slido.
Thank you, Waceke. Good day, dear colleagues. In order to join the poll questions, please log into slido.com and enter the hashtag anti-racism. Alternatively, you can also scan the QR code with a mobile device. The QR code is on the screen and you'll be led to the first poll question. Waceke, do you mind allowing me to share the screen so I can share the Slido, please?
Please go on.
Do you see the screen with the Slido? The first question. Can you please tell us what is an example of racism? You are allowed to respond with more than one answer. The options are differential treatment based on race, exploitation, harassment, or exclusion based on someone's race, hatred of someone based on skin color, negative body language towards an individual based on skin color, using institutional power to exclude access to jobs or career mobility or opportunities based on race. Negative body language towards an individual based on skin color, propagating racial stereotypes, differential treatment based on race. So far, we have 35 participants who have responded to the question, what is an example of racism? You are allowed more than one response. A couple more seconds before we close this poll, and thank you to the almost 90, let's reach 100. Thank you, colleagues, for joining the poll. Shall we move on to the next question? I'm still seeing responses coming in, so a couple more seconds. Let's go to the next question. What is an example of systemic racism? You can respond with more than one answer. The options are governments giving all races equal opportunities and benefits, institutions being represented by a diverse group of people, including all races, genders, and religions, and governments giving all races equal opportunities and benefits. Please let us know what you think. You can respond with more than one option to the question, what is an example of systemic racism? A couple more seconds. We're almost at the 200 respondent mark. Our third question is, what is an example of a microaggression? You're allowed more than one response. Your options are stop being overly sensitive when someone calls out a racial joke, a Black person always mistaken for a service worker, someone saying they're both Latina, I can't tell them apart, or someone else saying you are Asian, aren't you supposed to be STEM savvy? STEM meaning science, technology, engineering, and math. Is this an example of microaggression? That's such a white thing to do. You are so exotic. You sound so articulate. You are so smart. Where were you educated? Is that a microaggression? Or when people say, I don't see color, is that an example of a microaggression? More than one response is allowed for this question. Thank you. We've reached over 200 respondents. Thank you for joining. The poll questions, back to you, Waceke.
Thank you. I need to share my screen with you. So thank you, colleagues, for participating in the poll questions, just to arouse your awareness and bring you to the consciousness on issues like race, racism, microaggression, commonly used words that we come across when we are speaking on this issue of race and racism. So we are going to go straight into a session of learning together for about 25 minutes to explore on the issue of what is racism. Indeed, we know that laundry is the only thing that should be separated by color. That was an author who is unknown, but truly, indeed, we should only separate laundry by color, not individuals or people. But in the human race, we know we've been separating individuals and people by color. This session, of course, just to set expectation, is an overview of what race and racism is and what it is not, because we have many perspectives of what it is and what it is not, just to bring us to a common understanding. It is not a detailed class on race and racism because it's a very expansive subject. Therefore, we cannot be able to cover it in the 45 or 50 minutes that we have today. But it's a baseline awareness session because there is a need for all of us to have a shared common understanding on this subject so that we are able to engage individually and collectively together as we seek to address this scourge of racism. So within the UN, we are addressing the issue of race and racism within the UN, because outside of the UN has done a lot of work. We know that charity begins at home and justice begins next door to your neighbor, but charity begins at home. So let's begin from home and do some introspection on ourselves as the UN and how we are doing on this subject and how we treat each other. When you look at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 1 says that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Freedom, the sense of freedom, the sense of dignity and rights. Freedom is inherent in the ability to have choice, to have power. Racism and all forms of discrimination are a threat to social peace and stability. And the UN mission statement states that the maintenance of international peace and security, eradicating conflict across the globe, is a pivotal duty of this organization. So it is also a pivotal duty within ourselves to maintain peace and stability within the institution through addressing the question of race and racism. I like to quote the Declaration on Race and Racial Prejudice of 1978 that says that, convinced that all people and all human groups, whatever their composition or ethnic origin, contribute according to their own genius, to your own genius, to my own genius, to everyone's own genius, to the progress of civilization and cultures, which in their plurality and as a result of their interpenetration as a human race constitute the common heritage of mankind. We are in agreement in that. We also know that UN has made so many historical statements out there to the whole world. A series of them helping to demonstrate the absurdity of racial prejudice and racism based on science and other theories or ideologies that we may propagate in terms of racism. We have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of 1945, the Statement of Race of 1950, Statement on the Nature of Race and Race Differences in 1951, the Statement on Biological Aspect of Race because of pseudoscientific theories that claim race is scientific and it is not. Declaration of Race and Racial Prejudice adopted by UNESCO General Conference on 20th session of 1978, again saying that those pseudoscientific theory that propagate that race is biological in the name of science is incorrect. The International Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination of 1969. Then we have the Principles of Tolerance of 1995. And we also have the Durban Declaration of 2001. In addition to all this, we have an array of instruments like Principles of Equality and Non-Discrimination. We have constitutions from our various countries, all of them talking about non-discrimination and equality of all human beings. We have legal frameworks within our countries, within our organizations, including policies at the workplace and many others. How come then we ask ourselves this question of racism is still so persistent? This scourge, this ill, this ugly thing called racism is still with us. And I want to bring us back to what Martin Luther King said. Morality cannot be legislated. What all these instruments and legal documents do, of course, is legislate behavior, observable actions. But morality cannot be legislated. Behavior can be regulated. Judicial decrees, workplace policies may not change the heart of an individual, but they can restrain the heartless. Why? Because as individuals, we all have a conscience that tells us that dignity is inherent in each one of us. We should recognize dignity in every single individual we come into contact with. Preserve that dignity, and in our interaction, uphold that dignity. Because we know that International Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination says that elimination of racial discrimination throughout the world in all its forms and manifestation, and of securing understanding of and respect for the dignity of the human person is all about dignity. Any action that discounts, minimizes the dignity of another individual is uncalled for, is wrong, it's a scourge of racism, it's ugly. Because for those of us with a heart, and all of us have a heart, indeed your own conscience should restrain you from propagating racism towards another person. But what is really race? What are all these factors? Let's go back to what is diversity, because at the core of it all is asking ourselves that we embrace diversity, but then do we also embrace equality or inclusion? What is diversity? Diversity is all those factors, attributes, characteristics that make us different or make us similar. And even within similarity, there is a continuum of similarity within one factor. When you talk about skin color, there are tones and hues and shades of skin color. When you talk about language, there are dialects and accents. All those pieces that make us different and unique as individuals and as a group of people is diversity. Diversity in itself is very expansive. As you can imagine, has freedoms and of expression increase, choices increase, diversity factors will continue to expand. So they are really expansive and infinite. There are so many of them, but there are some diversity factors that truly stand out very quickly, like race and gender, then issues of religion, nationality, ethnicity, language. Some of them are obvious. Others are not so obvious, like cognitive preferences, and others behaviors and other preferences that an individual may have that is not obvious to the eye of another individual. Those ones you would have to know them as you establish relationship with people. But when you meet a person, the first thing you may see is their race and their gender, the first thing immediately. Then when they speak, probably their accent. Diversity factors are neutral. What do I mean by this? They should not be used as a merit factor to determine proficiency, to determine intelligence, or to determine competency of individuals. But we know we use diversity factors such as even race, sometimes accent and language and nationality to have stereotypes of competencies, incompetencies, or not competent, but they should be neutral. It is simply a factor that is neutral. A diversity factor should also be amoral. What do we mean by that? We mean that a diversity factor does not make you good or bad. But we know sometimes we associate certain colors with darkness or with evil or bad or with righteousness or goodness or kindness. But when we wear those colors as individuals, because we are born with those colors, it's amoral. It doesn't make you a good or a bad person because of your skin color or your phenotypes that you carry physically. We come to the question of, probably you may be asking, who are you, who am I? On our diversity dimensions, why they are so important and why we are discussing them right now, it is because they give us identity. If they were not giving us identity, then we would not be having all these emotive conversations and frictions and conflict. Because again, identity is tied to access. And access then is tied to how you do in life. So in a stratified world like the one we live in, identity gives you advantage or disadvantage. If you identify yourself with a certain gender, in terms of cultural arrangements, institutional arrangements, sometimes you have advantage or disadvantage. In a stratified world organized in terms of race, you are given advantage or disadvantage based on your race, your origin, ethnicity, your color. Identities give you dominance, make you a part of an in-group, or you are marginalized, a part of out-group. They give you access or barrier to three critical things that you require to transact your life: resources, opportunities, and rights. And these identities, of course, the identities that give you access or dominance or marginalization, all of them, sometimes they are also context-based. You may be in a context whereby your gender does not give you any disadvantage or advantage. Probably it is your race, or in other places, your race may not, it is your gender and cultural affiliation and preferences, including, somebody talked about diversity of thoughts, how our brain supports learning, neurodiversity, how we prefer to assimilate information, categorize it, and make decision, cognitive diversity that we bring to work, personality diversity, introvert, extrovert, choleric, melancholy, and all those others. So based on context, place, and circumstances, some of your identities may give you advantage, others may give you disadvantage. And our identities also can further be categorized into individual identity, my awareness of my existence as a separate being, a person, individual. I am Mary Waceke. Somebody else is called Marinette or called George. And you are aware of your own personal existence as an individual. But there is also collective identity. We belong to groups. We are social groups. We are born into social groups, the first one being family. And then we join schools. Then we join social groups. We join religious groups. And we professional groups, courses that we support globally. We become part of collective identities and extended identities. And today, especially with social media and social collections across the internet, we are able to join different affiliations of groups and affinity groups that support different causes in the world, giving us an extended identity away from your immediate collective. So those are all forms of identities. So you are always moving from one identity to another. You are always in this motion. And based on the space you are, you can feel included or excluded. You can feel powerful or vulnerable. You can be part of the dominant group or part of the marginalized groups. We also carry what we call our core identities. One of the core identities that stays and remains with us so much as we transact our lives and we navigate through the journey of life is our race. And everywhere you go, people quickly recognize it. Then we have other secondary identities that may not be so pronounced unless you go to those specific groups that really pronounce those identities. So all this is part of your collective complexity of who you are. Human beings are complex beings. Our identities also come together, as you already have guessed. They intersect. And this intersectionality can cause you to experience predominantly oppression or predominantly privilege, especially at the core and primary level of identity. But at the secondary level also, you can experience privilege and oppression at the same time because of things like social class, because of the things like education, or the trade you belong in, or how your qualifications are taken. In some places, they will say, wow, so they put you in the dominant group. In other places, we don't recognize those qualifications, and therefore you feel marginalized. So you can experience privilege and oppression on the basis of your competencies and qualifications based on context. So how do you feel when you're part of the dominant group? Maybe when you may be less aware of other groups' feelings and experience because you're part of the dominant group. You are the normal. You are taught you are the normal. You are the standard to which everybody else who wants to enter that group and be part of that group should aspire to and should measure up to. You may be so oblivious of this privilege that you are not always conscious that you need to aspire to be like somebody else and to measure up. You don't need to measure up. People have to measure up to your social group or to your collective or to your identity or to that diversity dimension that you carry. So you're oblivious that that is a privilege in itself, not having to worry how you will be treated, how you will be received, and how you will fare in life. You may show defensiveness or doubt regarding discrimination, exclusion, oppression, in this case, in terms of race. So you may become defensive when we speak about race and racism. You may try to deflect, distort, or derail the conversation because you don't think it is necessary. When you're part of the marginalized group member, you may feel very visible. You are the only woman at the table. You are the only Black person at the table. You are the only Muslim in a Christian country. You're the only Christian in a Muslim country. You are the only French speaker in an Anglophone place or vice versa. Name it, all those dimensions. So you may feel so visible, or sometimes you may be so invisible where your voice does not matter. Everybody else's opinion and voice matters, but nobody's asking you how you feel, what you think, or to contribute. You are invisible. You may have to work hard to gain acceptance and to measure up. You may be forced sometime to conceal your identity or to underplay your identities so that you can fit in. Code switching, concealment. You may even refuse to be part of affinity groups that mean something to you because you don't want to be identified with that identity, because that identity is disinvited, it's not invited in that space. You may always live your life in your psychic, aspiring to be like the dominant group and distancing yourself from your culture, your color, your accent, your food, and everything else that makes you a part of your life and who you are. Think of all the diversity dimensions that make you. And sometimes you just want to say, I don't, because you want to fit into the dominant group. You may also have self-hate due to internalized oppression. And this is one of the most negative impacts of racism, mental health, or any form of discrimination that vilifies an identity, especially your core identities. You will start having trouble and self-hate, thinking, well, I don't belong. How can I belong? And this struggle and internal dissonance can give you mental health issues. When you meet people, let's pause and think. When you meet people, what do you see? When you meet me, what do you see? When I meet you, what do I see? When you meet people, in terms of identity, what you see is only 10%. It's like the tip of an iceberg. Because a human being is more than the body that you see. They are a soul and their spirit. They have a mind, a will, and emotion. They have a sense of purpose and meaning towards life. You don't see that. You would need to establish a relationship to start appreciating them. And even busting some of your stereotypes you have about a certain diversity, dimension, or factor that they carry. You'll start saying, I always thought these people were, or they were. I'm surprised because you have now established the relationship and you're looking below the surface to the bigger tip of the iceberg that is below. You know, diversity is about just the 10% that you see because it's about head count. At how many different people do we have sitting at the table? How many colors, how many ethnicities and languages and tribes and genders do we have? So you quickly count that and tick the box. And you comfortably say, we have fulfilled our obligations to the world to be inclusive and to be diverse. But inclusion is not head count. It's about heart count. It's how you make people feel in the space you are in, as a group and even as an individual. Have you ever gone to visit a friend or to a party or to a workplace or to a group, social groups? You went there and you had this feeling and you know it. I don't belong here, or I'm not wanted. I'm not welcome. I'm not included. I'm not part of this. You make a contribution. Nobody gives you the attention. Nobody claps. Nobody applauds you. Nobody recognizes. But you're at the table. You have a seat at the table, but you have no voice at the table. Inclusion. When you meet a person, interestingly enough, it takes milliseconds to form a first impression. That is why, of course, I remember when I went to school, I went to a convent school, and the Catholic sisters always to tell us, you will never get a second chance to make a better first impression. So girls, you need to sit straight, you need to walk properly, your hands should not be everywhere. They taught us that because of first impression. You do something we call social sifting. You quickly form an opinion about the worth and a value of a person. And that value and the worth of that person, you are forming it based on your own perspective, your own skill, your own stereotypes. This individual is this color or has this accent or comes from this part of the world. Therefore, quickly I know they are lazy or they are incompetent or they are very good in sciences. You know, the model minority myth that we propagate towards people of Asian descent, or the incompetency myth that we predominantly propagate towards people of African descent, or the laziness myth that we tend to propagate towards people of Latinx. You quickly just judge individuals. They are worth to you, not in the world. And therefore you quickly either diminish or amplify their dignity. We frame people, we profile people. You are always asking, do you measure up? Do you measure up? Measure up to what anyway? So first impressions can block objectivity. They create prejudice. This millisecond social sifting of another human being translates to widespread stereotyping, to exclusion, marginalization, to oppression. And mainly in our workplace, there are three things we are always micro sifting very quick, social sifting in milliseconds. Can I trust you? Can we be on the same side? Especially in terms of career advancement and progression. Do you have power to curtail my progression? Do you have the capability? And this also especially because of leadership. Leaders make decisions which have got very big ramification to individuals' careers. So there's this issue of trust and power dynamics between team leaders and team members. What is truly inclusion? From my definition, But an individual truly feels included at the level of the extended self, collective self, and individual self. You feel fully resourced to effectively and optimally transact your life in this world. But we know, because of race, there are individuals and groups of people who are not fully resourced and optimal in terms of transacting their life in the world because of systemic issues. At the collective level, you feel fully resourced to live your life to your full potential. Many of us live our lives or underlive our lives because the systems we are in, the way they are structured, they hinder us. Or we need, to surmount so many barriers. And before you can even be through surmounting them, you've been sweating and panting until you drop. It is also having a seat and a voice at the table. Your voice matters. It's also ability to feel within the group you belong to, you can contribute meaningfully in life. We are all wanting to be meaningful. Human beings, we are social beings. So we are driven by this desire to belong, desire to achieve. That's why we go out and do something to achieve. And ultimately, we are also driven by the desire for meaning. We always try to make meaning of our lives, but we also want to mean something. That's why sometimes we step out and do good acts of kindness, random acts of kindness, contribute meaningfully in life. So the question of equality and equity also comes in, because this is all fantastic words that we use in our programs and plans in our workplaces. Equality is a state of being equal, especially in status, rights, and opportunities. And we have this in all declarations of human rights. Equity, on the other hand, is not necessarily equality. It's recognizing that diversity factors have been used as merit factors instead of treating them as neutral. They've not been neutral, and therefore they have created advantages and disadvantages for certain people and groups of people based on diversity factors. So equity is removal of barriers and addressing barriers to equality. I like to quote James Baldwin, who said that success is to be measured not so much by the position that one has reached in life, as by the obstacles which one has overcome while trying to succeed. Because some individuals and some group of people have more obstacles than others because of systemic discrimination, systemic issues. Sense of belonging. When you have a sense of belonging in a group, at the workplace, in your team, in your regional office, country office, in your function within the UN, it is that sense of knowing that your contribution is respected and valued. You matter. It is this continuous communication by your team members and your team leader, and you two communicating to them that you are me, you are us. We are because you are, and you are because we are. That's a sense of belonging, because we are intricately tied together. So let's come and zero in on what is race. All of us conceptualize race differently. That's why we are having this session. But why is it so important and matter so much? Why is it a global issue? At the level of the world, in our organizations, in communities, even to the granular level, to the team level, because racial identity predicts how one will fare in life, because racism is systemic. So what is race? Many of us did these Slido questions, and thank you so much for all those who responded, for being active participants in this session. Is it skin color, hair, or eyes? Fundamentally, sometimes people do quickly identify race with skin color. Is it geographical region, citizenship, or nationalities? Ethnic groups, culture, practices? Is race genetic? Is it a biological makeup? If you took my DNA and the DNA of somebody who does not look like me, or we don't share the same skin color, will you distinctly say, this is a person of African descent, this is a Caucasian, this is a person of Latinx, this is Asia Pacific? Genetic, is it? Is it an ideology? A social ideology, economic ideology, political ideology, even religious ideology? Is this socio-economic, political, or spiritual construct? an identity constructed? Does it have any physical or biological meaning? These are questions we should always reflect and ask ourselves. Is it an identity? What is it? Do we really need race? But let's look at the origin of this word race. Originally, race was looked at as a common language, history, or tradition, just that. It had no advantage or disadvantage. Then slowly, it became an origin and affiliation, a geographical region or nationality where people live and where they come from. In the 16th century, it became a general term in terms of language, an adjective to qualify a certain trade, blacksmith, people who practice medicine or such, to qualify trades. In the 17th century, with the beginning of the slave trade, race quickly changed and became physical traits, phenotypical, based on shared physical attributes and later social qualities. And this was ushered in because of slave trade. Remember, all of us, many cultures and groups had slaves. African people had African slaves. The British people had British slaves, or maybe Irish. The Muslims had slaves, the Christians had slaves, the Jewish people had slaves. We had slaves in our household based on socioeconomic stratas, not skin color, not race. But in the 17th century, there was a deliberate effort to trade a certain group of people for labor. So race now took a new perspective. It became predominantly phenotype because you could identify these people with their hair, their skin color, their eyes, or physical attributes. In the 18th century, during the English colonies, the more the agrarian revolution expanded and became the means of production was agriculture. And there was the need of the labor factors, land, capital, and labor, and to continue with these economic engines driven by agriculture. There was need to start sorting and ranking people in the English colonies so that you could quickly know who you can enslave and who you cannot in the 18th century. And of course, the labor needs expanded and economic expansion continued. But at this time, we also had scientists and also religious groups that began to oppose the nature of enslaving another human being and dehumanizing them. Because the only way you can block out your conscience, because as human beings, we are gifted with conscience, which animals may not have. You know, the lion, the king of the jungle, will never appeal to their conscience and say, oh, you little dick, oh, little gazelle, I feel so sorry for you. I cannot eat you no matter how hungry I am. My conscience does not allow me. And therefore I am becoming, a browser or a grazer like my friend zebra. There is no conscience. But human beings, we are blessed with conscience. And this is a conscience that makes us stewards of self, stewards of others, and the stewards of our planet. And this is a conscience that we appeal when we come together. And the only way to sear that conscience, to kill that conscience, when you're treating another human being as a slave, was to dehumanize them. And for that, they introduced what we call the Scala Naturae. Scala Naturae was a great chain of being ideology that initially was used for all creation, where they used to say, of course, we have God, then supernatural beings, then we have human beings, then we have living things like plants and animals, and then non-living things. And that would be the end of the great chain of beings. But at that time, they wanted to use this Scala Naturae or great chain of being to now categorize human beings themselves based on color and physical attributes, so that you could really probably, convince yourself you're not doing it wrong. And later, we found that the groups that were advancing this issue of slavery and benefiting from it, they funded pseudoscientific theories to promote the fact that race was genetic. and to prove inferiority of a group of people, and to prove that they only deserve to be used as free labor and to be dehumanized. In the 19th century, it was another point in history where this ideology of great chain of beings and categorization of people entered into social policy, soon into economic and political policy. It became a philosophy. It became an ideology to advance. It was embedded in our social fabrics and the way we transact life as a human race. And therefore, race began to seep into the world, and racism began to be systemic, and the foundations were deep and clear. In the 20th century, this ideology of separateness of human beings based on the great chain of being created a racial hierarchy where we had a certain group of people at the top and other group of people below, and in between, others, people of color could organize themselves between those two groups of people. And the issues of race and racism became part of public policy, social policy, economic policy, and structural arrangements, even including at the place of work. And race, therefore, as we know it, is very institutional, is very structural, is very systemic by its nature. So today we know that race is an ideology that has been advanced, that became part of the social construct, the way we construct life, the way we construct the relationship in human groupings, whether it's at the place of work, whether it is in community, even in countries, policies and systems were set that way, making racism an oppressive ideology, an oppressive social construct. So that is very quickly about the history of race and racism. So race is an identity defined by societal rules now. It's not intrinsic to human beings, but an identity constructed by society for groups of people. It is glorified by socio-economic and political systems that were built for and on dominance. Dominance for access of resources, decision-making about those resources and opportunities, and utilization of those resources. So when you come to the place of work, the one resource everyone is after is a job. And after that, another resource, career advancement, and other resources, whether it is information, is a resource. Yes? And then resources for survival and self-propagation. Because you look for resources, you know, so that you can survive, you can self-propagate, you can improve your state in life. We know that dominance is operationalized through structures of power, and structures of powers are called institutions. Power is vested in institutions. Institutions are powerful. They have the power to reward, and they have power to penalize. They have power to give access or deny access. They have a power to affect distribution of resources, even beyond geographical region. That is why institutions are regulated, because of recognition of the power vested in an institution, whether it is a hard or a soft institution. Culture is a soft institution by itself. So when you talk about a workplace culture, and leaders who work within the institution, because power is acquired and vested within the institution. When you hold a position with that institution, the institution, through delegation of authority, vests power upon you, but you should not own that power. That power is given to you to steward it. You are a steward of that power, not an owner of that power. Because the moment you start to own that power, you start to abuse it. Abuse of office, abuse of power. Power is vested in institutions, not in individual. Because an individual, when you vest power on an individual, we have despots and dictators. We have the 1945 Holocaust. Because power is vested in an institution is regulated and should have self-checking and self-regulation mechanisms themselves. That's why you have audit departments within an institution, compliance, and all these other departments, internal justice systems. But that is not enough. Externally, you are regulated. Financial institutions, medical institutions, name them all, because of the power they have over masses and the decisions they can make and the people they can affect. Institutions define how power is acquired. You know, at the regulatory framework of an institution, how is power acquired? You know, the governance structure of an institution. How is that power distributed? Who will hold it? Who will use it? And what amount of power? That's why we have organizational structures. You have SG, USG, ASG, D1s, D2P, all the way to the field offices and national staff, field staff, name it. Governance process. How is power distributed, accessed, shared, and accounted for? The final word is very important, accounted for. Why? Because this power should be held in stewardship, not owned. Institutions have power to reward and penalize, as we say. They can include, exclude, disinvite. Institutions can vest powers in offices or positions. So when you're holding a position, you're called a manager. But that position is not you. But many of us actually make the position ourselves. We become indispensable, you know? The position and ourselves become intricately tied together. And you have to remind people the position is me and I am the position. That's abuse of power. The effect of dominance and misuse and abuse of power begets systemic oppression. Oppression is a use of institutional power and privilege where one person or a group benefits at the expense of another. Whichever diversity dimension or stereotype you're using to benefit one group at the expense of another, that is oppression. That is, you're advancing systemic, whether racism or discrimination. Institutions can be instruments of dominance, indeed, as we have seen, and oppression, but all hope is not lost. They can also be instruments of good. And that's why institutions must stand up and be counted on what they are doing about racism and the actions they are taking to address systemic racism. If racism is predominantly systemic and institutional, then what is the use of this issue of person to person? Because we also see racism manifested at the individualized level, interperson and intrapersonal. At the interpersonal level, it's the issues you show racial prejudice, hatred, and discrimination towards another person. Okay? So, can you have reverse racism? No, you cannot have reverse racism. You can have prejudice, hatred, and discrimination towards another person. But racism is institutional in itself. You have to enact reverse racism. You have to have the institutional power and resource and mechanism to advance institutional changes against this individual for you to have reverse racism. So let me give an example. In my own country. So let's say I'm a woman, I'm a person of Black descent. I can advance racial prejudice or hatred or discrimination towards a person who's different, a person of white descent or Asian descent. But can I enact institutional racism against it? Then no, I don't have that power as an individual. It requires a whole system of individuals, policies, structures, systems, operations to enact racism. So don't confuse racial prejudice advanced by one individual against you or a person, then to say this is reverse racism or institutional racism. Institutions have great power in themselves to make decisions that affect a huge group of people. So all isms, sexism, racism, these are social phenomena and psychological states where prejudice is accompanied by power to systematically enact it. And that's the issue with reverse racism. It is not accompanied by power to systematically enact it. It is just a prejudice in itself. Is it right? No, it is not. It should not advance any prejudice. Isms is embedded in a system. So what is racism? In conclusion, as we go to a Slido, it's a belief that a race hierarchy exists. So ask yourself, do you believe that a race hierarchy exists? Do you treat people, do you transact life based on this racial hierarchy? Maybe consciously or unconsciously. It is a conscious or unconscious application of scala naturae and the great chain of being in everyday life transaction, embedding into your psychic the belief in race superiority or inferiority, making it part of your self-worth, your image and self-conceptualization and esteem. I esteem myself and conceptualize myself as worthy because of my race, or not worthy because of my race. It's about othering others, saying you are the others and us we are. Marginalization and oppression of a group of people based on a socially constructed racial hierarchy that privileges some groups against others. Further construction of sub-hierarchies, even within those same groups, because you can construct more prejudice based on hues and shades and tones of skin. So even within people of African descent, Asian descent, white descent, you can also have issues of prejudice based on hues and shades and tones of skin, colors and nuances of phenotypes that create privilege, social privilege especially, against another because of their skin tone. So beyond the binary of racism of black and white, you have colorism, shadism, ethnicity, geographical region. You have so many other isms. So it is not only binary, it is beyond binary. So racism manifests in various forms based on context, and therefore we have racisms. And now I'm going to hand you over to Marinette to take us through the next questions on Slido. So Marinette, I will now stop sharing so that I can hand over to you.
Thank you, Waceke. Hello again, colleagues. This is Marinette Abadilia, and we'll be going to the Slido account again, and you can join us on slido.com or using your mobile device. Please scan in the QR code on the left of the screen, and the password or hashtag is anti-racism. After Waceke's very interesting and full complementary presentation, can you tell us what is an example of systemic racism? Do you have a different view of an example of systemic racism? Is it oppression and discrimination towards a different race that occurs on a macro level, allowing racism to be socially acceptable? Is systemic racism government giving all races equal opportunities and benefits? Or is it institutions being represented by a diverse group of people, including all races, genders, and religions? For this question, you are only allowed to answer one. A couple more seconds, and then I'll pass back to Waceke to continue the presentation. We've reached 300 respondents. Thank you for participating in the poll.
Thank you. So I'll continue to share my screen with you. So we'll move on now to look at the question of ethnicity. Ethnicity introduces, of course, other layers and facets of race, because we have our different cultures, our ethnic groups, and even within those ethnic groups, we have sub-ethnic groups. So ethnicity is really a social construct which divides individuals into smaller groups based on characteristics such as shared sense of group membership, values, behavioral patterns, language, sometimes political, economic interest, history, and ancestral geographical base, ethnic groups. Racism also appears in inter and intra groups, which are ethnic groups. discrimination probably of like the historical discrimination of Irish people and the Welsh people, the Jewish people, the caste system in the Asian community and societies, tribalism that you find also in Africa. And then we have issues like ethnocentricity, where you prefer your culture and practices and glorify them and hold them superior to others. We know that organizational cultures tend to lean more heavily towards ethnocentricity. The dominant group tend to inform the culture of an organization. That is why organizations and corporate structures must clearly define what is our culture and what is an inclusive culture. We've seen issues of out-groups and in-groups, where if you're an in-group, you're in the dominant group, and out-group, you're marginalized. And the issues of xenophobia, the fear of individuals who are seen as out-group to yourself or foreign to yourself. Racial prejudice, hatred, and discrimination, we mentioned it. It's really an individual's action. But what is critical to really note here is that when this individual is propagating racial prejudice, hatred, and discrimination as their individual action, but in their position they are holding as a member of a group, and even as a leader within that group or an institution, they validate, reinforce, give expression to and propagate racism and contribute to a racist workplace culture. So an individual's action within an institution cannot be seen as individual only, because this individual have the courage and the boldness to enact those kind of actions within the system, because either the system is condoning it or has a gap, an institutional gap that is not seeing this. Therefore, they need to strengthen their internal mechanisms of accountability and internal justice, or because the institution, leadership, and the governance structure and internal justice systems are choosing to look the other way, and the individual can continue doing this within the institutions. So the actions of an individual within an institution, and especially a leader to whom the institution has delegated power to hold a leadership position, and you propagate this kind of behavior, you are part of the system. It stops being individual behavior and becomes part of the systemic racism and part of the oppression. We have used the word discrimination a lot, especially at the workplace. ILO Article 1 says that it provides that discrimination includes any distinction, exclusion, or preference made on the basis of race, color, sex, religion, political opinion, national extraction, or social origin, and among many other diversity factors which we know today. But what does this have? Which has the effect of nullifying or impairing equality of opportunity at the workplace or treatment in the employment or occupation. And what is privilege? A word that we keep using a lot. Privilege is a special advantage. It is a form of immunity, permission, a right or a benefit granted or enjoyed by an individual or a class of people or a caste of people, in this case based on their race. But it can also be enjoyed based on gender, you know, the gender privilege in a patriarchal society. So privilege is a special advantage. You can even be oblivious of it because you're so used to it. And you feel offended when it is mentioned. But we don't shame and blame an individual for having privilege that they were born into. What you can do is hold that individual accountable to use that privilege, because it's a form of social power, to use it responsibly to dismantle systemic discrimination. It is an unearned access to a resource, and especially social power. It is readily available to some individuals as a result of their social group based on race or based on social class. It could also be social class or education. But in this case, on race and racism, it is based on race. A privileged group member is a member of an advantaged social group privileged by birth or acquisition. Being born white, being born male is a privilege in our world. Also being born middle class, it's a privilege. It gives you access to better schooling, better education, wherever you are, whether you are in global south or global north. If you are middle class, it's middle class because the socioeconomic class. Being born West or global North is also a privilege. If you're in a society that respects the caste system or transacts social life based on a caste system, being born higher in the caste system is a privilege. Being born of the political elite, especially in Africa, is a privilege. The political class have certain privilege. So you can ask yourself, what is a privilege am I holding? And now to go to that, and what can I do? And what are you willing to do? Because now we appreciate what is race and racism, what is discrimination, what is prejudice, what is privilege. We are going to do a Slido question over to you, Marinette, on what are individuals willing to do to address racism.
Thank you, Waceke. My screen is up. And the question we have on screen right now for the Slido is, how do you identify racially? We've had a number of colleagues respond, and the word cloud is looking lovely. How do you identify racially? Please join us on slido.com or use the QR code with the password or hashtag anti-racism to enter your response and let us know how you identify racially. In addition to being identified racially, there are several phrases also. A couple more seconds and we'll move on to the next question. Will we be able to reach 200 respondents? So far, we're at 150. How do you identify racially?
Yeah, we have a lot of identification: Black African, white Latina, Indian, human race, white European, I don't, Caucasian, inhumane, Latino, Arab, human, West Asian, Black, Asian, African descent, Black, power imbalance, skin color, I don't know, Arab, neutral, Irish, Western Asian, quite a lot of self-identification.
Yes, there are also
only one human race, race-related and equal treatment, Latino, skin color, African, Black African, white, EZD, mixed, none, mixed and depending. Thank you, colleagues, for continuing to participate. Thank you for being an active participant and accepting to overcome your fears and to speak up and to take the action to identify in whichever way you identify. It is your prerogative to do so.
We also have colleagues saying that when people are not treated equally,
yeah, are you able to, you are reading something from the chat, Marinette? So colleagues continue to identify, to contribute.
there's also respondents.
Whichever way you identify yourself, you are owning your identity by saying how you identify yourself. So EZD, none, white Latina, Arab, all are welcome, Caucasian, white European, Irish, mixed, African, Latino, Indian, I identify as a human, African descent, Black, human race, Latina, color of my skin, neutral, skin color, power imbalance. Okay.
We have one in French that says, il respecte privilège du blanc sous le noir dans le magasin bureau, meaning privilege of being white and over black in a magazine, an office store. Shall we go to the next poll question, Waceke?
Yes, please.
What are you willing to commit to doing to end racism? Please share with us, what are you willing to do to commit to doing to end racism? We have several responses coming in through the word cloud. Educate is a big one. Speak up.
Sure.
Leading by example. Talk about it. Respect for all. Awareness at the workplace. Educate. Equity. Not to be racist. Educate others about racial dynamics. To listen and learn. To talk about it. To advocate. To start with myself. To committing. To participating. To remind others. To stop stereotyping. Being mindful of behaviors, prejudices, and biases. Setting the example, promoting inclusion, respecting one another, to work on my biases, start seeing all sides, to speak up whenever it rears its ugly head, to be empathetic, to treat people the way I would like to be treated and be open-minded, to treat everybody with dignity and respect, to become a democratic nation, to identify and avoid biases, to condemn racism. Lead by example is a big one. Thank you, colleagues, for actively participating.
Thank you. Well done. Very good answers there. Not to be racist, educate others about racial dynamics. Very powerful things. Learn, listen, and discuss. All these are fantastic examples. Speak out, equity, talk, empathy, advocate, talk about it, awareness. Thank you so much, colleagues. Very good answers that you are giving us there.
We also have communicate and to upstand. To advocate anti-racism and combat racism. Tolerance and cultural diversity. Our 185 colleagues have responded to our word cloud. Will we make it to 100? Treat everyone equally without minding their race or origin. Someone also wrote acknowledging and acknowledge and just moved to adjust language. Colleagues are also committing to do whatever it takes to learn more about systemic racism and speak up on microaggressions.
Yes.
To take example on children who do not see differences in people.
Because we are socialized into those differences, Marinette. That's sure.
One colleague has written no laundry rule with people.
Great, yeah. Only laundry should be separated based on color. Absolutely. Thank you for that and reminding us that. Indeed. And of course, promoting that awareness is important within ourselves and using it to self-regulate every time we meet people. Okay, thank you, Marinette. So I will share my screen. We continue. Do I have your permission?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, colleagues, thank you so much for participating in that Slido and giving us such great answers on what we can do. What can I do? Just to remind ourselves again that racism is not by its nature, by its characteristic, it is institutional. And therefore the biggest work we need to do systemic work. Systems when you look at systems, and these are familiar word to all of us working within the UN, systems are made of organizational structures, governance, the way decisions are made, strategic decisions, especially that are made at high level of an organization, a community, an institution, a group of people, even a community-based organization have their own structures. That's part of a system. The second piece of a system is organizational processes. How will we operationalize our mandate? And how will we operationalize the work that we do? And at this level, we also have governance structures, but they make tactical decision-making at mid and lower levels of organizations and management, including work instructions, how work will be carried out. The third piece of systems are made of leadership and management structures. Because institutions must vest decision-making in an individual. They give them the authority to make decisions and to write and put their pen to paper and sanction certain actions and policies within an organization to guide decision-making. Therefore, leadership and management practice are a powerful core of an institution and part of the systemic work that must be done to address racism. Then the next thing is workplace culture, because culture is the organizational mind. It is the mind of an institution. You know, our minds, especially our subconscious mind, affect 90% of all your decision-making. So culture is this invisible, it's an invisible but a very powerful force that influences how decisions are done, who gets rewarded, what gets applauded, what gets sanctioned, what gets frowned at, and what gets embraced. That is culture. It is the way we do things around here. Some of it is written or unwritten rules. The fifth part is accountability and reporting mechanism. How do we hold individuals accountable for the power they hold formally within an organization? We also have informal power structures and also what we call affinity groups within organizations that have got power in themselves. Employee resource groups, staff unions, various affinity groups within an organization. They also have some level of power, especially social power, to influence and advocate. How do we hold the entire system accountable? And when we violate the sense of inclusion and dignity and equality and respect for all human beings and discount, devalue that dignity in another human being, how do we seek redress? So all these parts of the system must be reviewed and redesigned to eliminate embedded bias based on a diversity factor. The way we did with the gender, now we can do it with race and create heightened level of awareness on not only racism, but especially for any individual who is making a decision with ramifications within the system, can self-sanction and self-correct before they make that decision. So systemic work, because it is very easy for us to do the individualized work, to be courteous and well-mannered and to say thank you, sorry, and apologize. We even avoid talking because we don't want to step on people's toes. We can do all that. But as one colleague in the UN said to me, you know, you can be racist in a very diplomatic way, using very diplomatic language and being very courteous. So we have to do the systemic work, and then we also do the individualized level of interpersonal, intrapersonal. One thing is to recognize your privilege. I have 3 R's in terms of privilege. And again, let us be reminded, you don't shame or blame an individual or vilify them for having that privilege. They were born into it. You cannot vilify them, but you can hold them accountable to recognize their privilege so they don't go through life oblivious of that privilege and therefore using it against other individuals and discounting other people and using racial slurs and jokes and really normalizing their stereotypes about other people. So recognize your privilege, whichever privilege you're holding. All of us hold a certain degree of privilege. So look at your racial privilege, but also other privileges you're holding that are beyond race. Reflect on that privilege, on how it has shaped your worldview and the lenses through which you see the world. And then choose consciously to be magnanimous and responsibly use that privilege to dismantle systems that give you privilege at the expense of other individuals, you are removing barriers to equality. And I like what individuals say, let's self-educate, be open, be curious to learn. Don't be afraid. I know we will make mistakes. I will make mistakes. Somebody else will make mistakes. But if the intent is to learn, you are authentically and genuinely wanting to learn how to navigate the issues of race and racism, then the mistakes we make, that's what calls for tolerance towards those mistakes and say, I'm still on the journey to learning. Accept to be uncomfortable. The issues of race make all of us uncomfortable. Many times we claim that the issues of race only make the privileged or people of white descent to be uncomfortable. But even myself as a Black individual, or as a Latinx, or as an Asian, or whichever diversity dimensions you identify yourself with, you will feel uncomfortable because you're afraid to make a mistake. Will I say a word that will offend? Will I step on a live wire? So let us challenge our own biases. Let us accept to be uncomfortable. Let us be comfortable with discomfort of this conversation. Learn and adjust. Let us practice allyship. Being an ally means you're an active bystander. You are watching something happening to an employee that is not right, or a colleague, and you speak up about it. When you're an active upstander is when you recognize, I cannot only speak about it, but because I have privilege, I'm going to stand up and use my privilege to dismantle whatever allowed this to happen so that it does not happen again. An active bystander enacts a corrective action. An upstander goes beyond that and also enacts a preventive action so it doesn't happen again. Speak up actively creates psychological safety for everyone. What about if you have internalized privilege or you have internalized oppression and it is part of your self-psychic and conceptualization? An individual conceptualization governs, it's like an architectural blueprint from the premise where you build your life, you transact your life, you see the world that way because of self-conceptualization. If privilege and oppression is part of your self-conceptualization, it's part of your self-concept, it's part of your self-worth, self-esteem, self-image, the regard you give yourself, the way you see yourself, it's part of your self-confidence to even address the issues of race and to self-identify and to speak about it without fear. All these are ways of really then saying, am I addressing my own biases also? And also creating an enabling environment for other individuals also to speak about it and to self-express in terms of race and racism. You can use tools of self-affirmation if you have internalized racism and internalized oppression that causes you to diminish yourself, to be afraid to speak up, to lack confidence, to say, this is my state in life, I accept it. You can affirm yourself. Saying that I am worth of dignity and respect is self-affirmation. And if you believe that, chances are you will also propagate the same towards other people. You will see other people as worth of dignity and respect when you see yourself as worth of dignity and respect, no matter your skin tone, hues, or shade. Beyond that, reach out for psychosocial support. There is nothing wrong in asking for support and for help. So ask for help. And there are many other support systems the organization can provide. And above all else, we all have a personal responsibility to be tolerant. As we increase our awareness on this subject and as we wade into it, as we build courage and boldness to speak about it. Fear is not the solution. Courage and authenticity to speak about it is a solution. Let us not maintain what we call negative peace. Negative peace is based on avoidance. Don't rock the boat, avoid talking about this thing, say it does not exist, avoid it, deflect it, distort it, even derail it if you must. But don't get engaged in dismantling it. No, let us have positive peace that comes because we are addressing this issue continuously and actively, and we are tolerant of each other. The Declaration of Principles of Tolerance say that given the new wave of intolerance and extremism, revitalizes the concept of tolerance by presenting it as an active attitude arising from recognition and respect of human rights of each other and every person. So with that, I want to hand over back to the team for questions and answers. And thank you, colleagues, for giving me your attention and giving me the space to contribute. I deeply appreciate that. Thank you.
You're on mute, Mary.
Yeah, I'm saying over to you for questions and answers. Please guide the process, the person who is meant to guide this process.
All right, thank you everyone for being part of this. I can say we have many questions, lots of conversations happening in the chat and in the question and answer section. And with that, we'll proceed and ask some of the questions. Mary, you've spoken to some of these issues. And before we've spoken to some of these issues. So very quickly, I'll say that one of the questions is that there's this whole discussion about in the chats about race, racism. It's how it is shown in the way we use language in the UN, saying that the 6 languages in the UN are not necessarily the most dominant languages in the UN. However, what pops out, what is very clear is that people feel that the discussion on racism is being had by those who are actually affected by it. When do we include all those other non-Black colleagues who might not, how do we include them in the conversation? Over to you.
Okay, so there's a question about language. I will start from the perspective of how are institutions and organizations put together, especially corporate organizations. Corporate organizations are brought together with a certain mandate, a vision and a mission and a goal. And then that organization comes up with structures, operational systems and structural arrangements, and also they come up with risk management mechanisms, culture, and then they recruit people. Sorry. And then they recruit people to come into that organization to operationalize that mandate within the structures that have been created, within the operations and policies and procedures created. Of course, for us to be able to understand each other, we do need a common language. So you have a common language that you all use, and that's why then you go out, when you advertise for a job, you look for certain competencies. When an organization cuts across regions and becomes global and international, they have a consciousness and awareness that there's more than one language. But of course, they have to zero into a group of languages. You can imagine an organization cannot probably have 100 languages, has working languages in terms of day-to-day operations because of the operational and administrative burden to the organization, rendering it inefficient. So we recognize that. So we have to be pragmatic and realistic in terms of closing the gap. But then you say, when you bring the affinity of all the groups we have recruited into our organization, what are the top maybe 3, 4, 5 languages that the organization can effectively and efficiently work with? And then put those languages there and support them to be used and support individuals to use these languages. But also as individuals, I must say, we have shared and collective responsibility and individual responsibility. I have an individual responsibility to also self-educate, as you have correctly said, and to bring myself up to speed to the languages I feel comfortable with and become excellent in that as part of the languages used, and probably learn another language and ask for support when I need support. But the institution does need to recognize this language and give them equal support in terms of use. Context also matters a lot. There are those offices which are in Anglophone countries, others are Francophone countries. And of course, it's always good to interact with our teams and see their level of comfort, but not only their level of comfort, but also the level of comfort of the constituents that we serve. Because organizations don't exist for themselves. Sometimes I know we can be so inward looking that we forget that we were brought together, especially by the UN, to serve. And we serve vulnerable groups. So that is a part of context we must bring to the language conversation. It may not be as straightforward as it is, but using those big frames, how many languages can we accommodate so that the institution does not increase administrative burden and become inefficient and we never serve? And those languages, do they cut across all the affinity groups that we have so that every employee can have a way of expressing and identifying and communicating and doing their work indeed? But then also, apart from looking inside, we need to look outside to the bigger constituent that we serve and the context in which we serve, because we must be able to communicate with them and to serve them. Thank you. Over to you, Teddy.
Thank you, Mary, for that. Game will ask the next question.
Yes, thank you, Mary. I believe you partly discussed this earlier, but one attendee had asked, how can an individual become a quote unquote ally? How can an office encourage more allies, especially if the organization is mostly Western countries and white individuals, then we'll need them to be a part of the solution.
Thank you. Thank you for that question on allyship, how to be an ally. One thing that when you're an ally, you are recognizing that you hold a certain power, a certain resource, a certain opportunity that you could use on behalf of another to remove barriers to equality and improve their experience of inclusion and belonging. We can be allies at the level of individual, what I call individual allyship. Then we also talk about collective allyship, where a team and a group of people come together to speak about a certain issue and use their collective power, their collective resource to speak to that and create allyship and dismantle or remove the barriers to equality. We also have institutional allyship, where a whole institution, like we saw during the Black Lives Matter movement, so many institutions came up, maybe expressing their allyship by giving voice or giving money or resources or whatever opportunity, whichever. So institutional allyship, collective allyship, and individual allyship. Allyship starts by recognizing and appreciating that I hold a certain resource that other individuals don't hold. And this resource, I can use it, whether it is my courage, my boldness. Somebody could be timid and may not speak up. We are at the table within a team. One team member of a certain diversity dimension or a person of a certain descent, maybe a person of Asian descent, makes a contribution that really makes a lot of sense and really is apt, and nobody recognizes. So knowing that I am bold and courageous, probably I say, yes, indeed, as my friend Parvin said, this is where I amplify the voice of Parvin, you know, or Verushka or whoever else, that their voice had been diminished, yet they had made a contribution. That is allyship. It could be allyship in terms of other systemic privilege I may have. And I can speak to my colleagues who may be holding a certain stereotype or bias towards individual of a certain identity, and educate my colleagues because they will listen to me better because I belong to this group. I could mobilize our own group to create collective allyship, to bring more voices to the table. I could also speak to our institution and continue to advocate that as an institution, we need to take a stand or a matter on this issue. So allyship. So start by recognizing the privilege and the power that you hold. How can you effectively use it? Can you augment that power through collective allyship? Go ahead and look for that collective allyship. Find means and way to collect more social power, to use more social capital to transact on behalf of vulnerable groups. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary, for that. I think in the first question, I'd asked if you could touch on the whole idea on how the conversation being had on racism is mainly centered around people who are actually experiencing it. How do we get those who are not experiencing it to be part of the conversation? If you could touch on that in your next segment. And also, I'll ask just a second question. This one I'll direct it to Mr. Kamara and possibly yourself to say our comment that's coming out is that could the UN system be deemed to be inherently racist based on the fact that its staffing is based on categories of so-called national and international staff? Over to Mary and Amadou.
I will tackle the issue of centering this conversation, then probably Kamara, being a leader within the UN, could tackle the second question from the UN perspective. Naturally, what happens when you introduce issues of discrimination and anti-discrimination, you tend to tune your eyes and tune your actions towards the individuals who have experienced that discrimination. Of course, to put a light and say, yes, here they are, it's actually reality, they have experienced it. But we know that we are, as a system, we act together within a system. We cause and affect and reinforce each other, the system theory. So you cannot focus only on individuals who are experiencing that racism, because indeed, those who are not experiencing it could be consciously or unconsciously propagating it. So you need to bring them to the awareness if it's unconscious. If it is conscious, you bring to an awareness and say, hey, stop it. But even the individuals who are experiencing it, you do need to come to the granular level because of internalized oppression, where they could be advancing not racism, but prejudice against each other and creating barriers. Because as we said, racism, you need the systemic backing to enact racism. But that does not mean that at intra-level, you are not advancing prejudice against one another. So the first point is that here is an injured group. You know, when you talk about restorative justice, here is the injury, admit the injury, and then together come together and co-create the corrective measures and the preventive measures. And of course, preventive measures means dismantling, dismantling the systems that allow this to continue and raising awareness. And the most powerful thing is also those who are not experiencing it, to raise your both self-awareness and social awareness, accompanied by empathy to do something about it. And collectively knowing that we are a human race gifted with where we began, the sense of conscience. Sometimes, there's a way oppression and there's a way privilege also can sear your conscience, almost make it dead. How do we keep our conscience awake? Today, we are talking about conscious capitalism, conscious organization, bringing conscience back into institutions. But we bring conscience back into institutions by bringing conscience back into individuals within those institutions and those who hold certain level of power, both formal power, structural power, informal power, social power. All of us collectively are saying, how do we use it? So you cannot expect the victims to, let me use that word, victims of racism, to be the one to educate, to solve the problems of racism, to dismantle the systems. They may speak up, but do they have the power to dismantle the systems? Do they have the power and the resources? Do they have the support? So that collectiveness of coming together and recognizing we are in this together and we do need to work on this issue together, collectively as a world, collectively as an institution, collectively as a human race, collective as a group, collective as a neighbor. Charity begins at home, justice begins next door with your neighbor. So doing right by your neighbor also. Thank you. Over to Kamara for the question on the UN systems.
Thank you very much, Mary and Teddy. It's a very good question. And I'll start by saying, first of all, that not all national staff are the same. If you're a national colleague in Geneva or New York, it's quite different than being a national staff in Mogadishu or Kampala. So the differences in benefits and privileges of national colleagues are not themselves inherently a racist phenomenon, because even among internationals, you may have different regimes of benefits. But however, what happens is very frequently what we do see is that for those who have implicit bias, the differentiation between international and national staff provides ample opportunity for them to exercise that bias, sometimes with impunity, especially in the global south, where we have the vast majority of national staff. Very frequently, they just don't receive the respect they deserve, and they are sometimes marginalized. I'll give you concrete examples. National staff come in different categories. We have national professional officers, and they're just as qualified and just as capable, and even by the regulatory framework, they can supervise international staff. But I've been frequently in some situation where an international staff simply refused to be supervised by national staff, even though that national staff is more qualified, just as competent and in fact deserving to be a supervisor. And we have to fight that on the individual level. But yes, there is a structural difference, and there is a difference in opportunities and perhaps visibility, especially for post-conflict countries, between national and international. And this is one of the issues, by the way, we are looking at as part of the task force. The working groups are looking to see how, in fact, we can level the playing field a little bit and ensure that all colleagues of the United Nations are treated equally with dignity, and they're given the respect and safe place in which to apply their trade fully. Over to you, Teddy.
Thank you so much for that. We've gone past our meeting time by 10 minutes. Mr. Kamari will allow us maybe 2 to 3 more last questions, and then we'll hand it over to you to close the meeting. Is that okay with you?
Sure, understood.
Okay.
Please go ahead.
Thank you. So I'll hand it over to my colleague, Gemo, for the next question.
Thank you, Teddy. Waceke, we had a comment that stated, there is also intersectionality between race and gender in which women of a certain race can be subjected to further discrimination and undermined based on race in addition to gender. This also applies to persons with disabilities and other factors that impact race and identity. Could you comment on the definition of intersectionality and how we may address racism while also acknowledging the other forms of discrimination that staff may experience? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that question. The issue of intersectionality brings us to the fact that indeed that we carry very many identities, and those identities act together. They don't act in isolation. Of course, based on context, some identity may be primary or more pronounced, and others may be subsumed, but that does not mean they are not acting. So they act together to create a recipe of privilege or oppression, or to create your own unique experience on how you're experiencing oppression or experiencing privilege, because of how the various identities you personally carry interplay with each other. Intersectionality as a word was introduced by Kimberly Crenshaw in her seminal paper when she was doing a study about gender, actually, specifically to gender. And she was looking at how the issue of race intersect with gender. And she did say that from her research, and widely shared, that the way a woman of Black descent experiences oppression is very different from how a woman of white descent experiences oppression because of gender. Because one has the privilege of race, and the system is easier on her because of race. While the other individual, the system is gamed against her, because racism is where the system you operate in is already gamed to create barriers. You are born into a gamed system. So that is what is intersectionality. So bring the issue and the ideas of even other perspective like disability, persons living with disability. So you can imagine if you are a woman, the gender factor, if you are a person of Black descent, and then you are a person living with a disability. It compounds your experience of oppression, discrimination, exclusion, and inability to transact your daily lives effectively, let alone optimally, and realize results. So the issue of intersectionality is how the different perspective, even from gender orientation, sex orientation, religion, caste system, patriarchy, even neurodiversity, how we support learning. We know that autism, for example, individuals have been excluded, but it's just that their brain supports learning differently. Therefore, we should create an environment that can work with that way that their brain supports learning. But if you don't do that, what is going to happen to this individual? They are autistic, and maybe they are Black descent or Asian descent or wherever they are placed. They will experience compounded exclusion and inability to transact their life effectively and optimally. So it is very important, of course, to always say, how do we look at the issue of intersectionality when we are addressing all these matters collectively? Again, that does not mean you should not address critical diversity matters like race that are very systemic and really embedded into the systems of the world. and we are born into those systems. I like to say that every generation that walks upon the face of the earth, at their given time and their own season, they will have to define for themselves what is a fair, just, and an equal society. And in their own unique way and in their own time and season and context, find mechanisms to address the issues of inequality that are driven by race, which is very, very, very systemic, and even driven by other intersectionalities of genders and others. What we do need as ourselves at this time and seasons, we are the ones who are alive, awake, and alert addressing this issue. It is our responsibility and sacred duty to address this issue and hand over the light and the baton to the next generation so that we may be counted that during our time and our season, we did something. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Mary. Two last questions, one directed to you, Mary, and the last one to Mr. Kamara. Mary, to you, comment from one of the staff members says, as a white man living in Kinshasa, I'm constantly privileged by security services, receptionists, etc., being greeted as boss, patron, chief, etc. You may not call it racism, but for me, this distinction is very frustrating as it creates an obstacle for an exchange as equals. Anwar is asking, sometimes someone feels intimidated by senior staff. Is this emotional racism as well?
Okay.
For Mr. Kamara, last question is to say that race is not an accepted category in the UN. Should this be included in the way in which we collect data? Over to the both of you, and then over to lastly, Mr. Kamara, to close the meeting.
Thank you. Thank you to that question. Our colleague from Kinshasa has raised an issue that is of systemic in itself because of the embedded biases and stereotypes on how we should treat each other based on race. So you will find that probably you are a person of white descent, you are working in the global south, you are working in Africa. And because of the embeddedness of stereotypes within a system whereby you should not treat everybody the same, we need to treat expatriates in a more privileged manner. So you are greeted as a boss, you are given security, you are given maybe household service workers, nannies, and everything else. And this, yes, creates barriers for you to interact because already physically and symbols of power have been put all around you, even sometimes unnecessary symbols of power. I want to refer to a session we had in terms of implicit bias working group where we were discussing with external entities and how they treat some of these individuals. And one organization told us very, very clearly that within their organization, even though it is global and huge, they don't have expatriates at all. When you work in a certain country, you are given an enabling environment that is given to an employee within that country that is enabling environment for you to operate in. There is no special treatment. Is that you have come to do a job, this job is valued, the worth of this job is this amount, it will be paid to every single person who holds that job without any extra provisions or, as you're saying, security and guards and all that. But of course, again, we don't want to be oblivious. If indeed there is a danger to an employee, whether they are an expatriate or a national staff or wherever they come from, not because of their skin color or their ethnic origin or their national origin, but there is a safety risk, then that safety risk should be mitigated for everyone. There is a health risk, it should be mitigated for everyone without preferential treatment because it's a human being, it's a human being. But of course, there are reasons why some of those HR policies are there. They should be interrogated as part of the systemic review on systemic issues of policies and operational procedures that sanctioned or put that in place. Probably they have outlived their purpose. There could have been a reason long time ago because of eminent or continuous or persistent high risk to this particular position held by this particular individual. But is it still there? So probably it is good to also review that. When you put so many symbols of power around an individual, yes, it creates a barrier. And of course, it brings us to the question of power, rank, and privilege. and how power, rank, and privilege can be a hindrance to creating an unracist organization, an anti-racist, an anti-racist culture, an anti-discriminative culture. So the issues of power, rank, and privilege, because power intimidates. Our colleague has told us about that emotional racism. It is a power that intimidates. So you're asking yourself, as a leader, am I approachable? And as a leader, do I taunt this power and display it even the way I carry it? I want deference to power. And also, so the leadership behavior and how they handle and transact and use that power as a resource can cause an intimidation or an inclusion. So how a leader handles power, but also my own self-conceptualization towards power. If in my culture, I have deference to power, we've been told children are to be seen and not heard, or women are to be seen and not heard, or youth are to be seen and not heard. So even using the age difference in my culture, I might defer so much to power to a point of intimidation. So the person holding the power holds the bigger share of responsibility to demystify that power and include and bring. That does not mean you violate boundaries of respect towards your leader. And of course, and that is very different from intimidation about power. It is not fear, it is respect that you can accord even your own colleague that you're working with in the same team. So review yourself, your perspective towards power, your upbringing, your culturalization about power. And then also look at the leader, how they carry that power. They could be carrying it and displaying it and using it and operationalizing it in a very intimidating manner, instead of holding it in terms of stewardship. So there's that collective responsibility in terms of that emotional sense of when you feel intimidated, you feel vulnerable. So you're asking yourself, where is this vulnerability coming from? Why do I feel the way I do? If you can speak up, share with other colleagues, share with other individuals on how they feel about this emotional intimidation because of issues of power. And the organization itself, training leaders to be more empathetic, to be inclusive leaders, and to display inclusive behavior as leaders. Thank you. So over to you, Amadou.
Thank you, Mary. There was a colleague who asked a question, I believe, with respect to how we collect data on race in the United Nations. This is a very perceptive question, because indeed, the first thing that we grappled with in the working group was trying to define the extent of racism in the United Nations without having the requisite data. Diversity in the United Nations is enshrined in Article 101, paragraph 3 of the Charter, which governs the staff selection system, and this is operationalized under the principle of geographical distribution. And the aim is that the international character of the organization should be maintained and avoid undue predominance of national practices, and ensures policies and administrative methods of the secretarial reflect the various cultures and technical competence of member states. So we do it by geography. And we know that even if we achieve full geographical representation, it will not also equate to racial equality, because the world is that complex. And yes, we've contemplated, we think it will be a good idea, but this falls under the prerogative of member states to change. So although we'd like to see it happen, it will be very difficult to actually institutionalize without getting the cooperation. But we do see the deficit there, and I think our work will have been made easier, both in manifesting the extent of racism, but in measuring as well whatever mitigating measures and policies we put in place to measure how effective they are without an ability to actually have data on race. But it is what it is. And I think if I write to Teddy, I think this may be bringing us to the close, because we're a little bit over our time. And with that, let me say, colleagues, first of all, let me thank Mary for her brilliant presentation. and educating us on what racism is, how it manifests itself both in the workplace and in our lives. It was very, very enriching, and it was very useful. But in closing, allow me to share just a few reflections. Racism is a learned behavior. Nobody is born racist. Perceiving others knowingly or unknowingly with inferiority, subjugation, and indignity is hurtful. The structures that have been built to reinforce racism can be dismantled. Understanding that will shift our personal and work lives. The workplace is very important for all of us. Committing to combat racism requires courage. The courage to see the issues and call it for what it is. The courage to speak up and not be silent. And the courage to look inwards to change the way we do things, individually and collectively. And in so doing, let me just use the opportunity to remind something very important that Mary said, among many other important things, was this is not meant to vilify any group. This is meant to have a honest and safe discussion on a very sensitive topic. No matter if you're privileged, if you find yourself on the other side, if you want to be an ally, what we know is if we don't have an honest discussion and we're not able to talk out openly, we'll never be able to address the scourge. We cannot be ostrich, bury your head in the sand and hope the problem goes away, or you say if you don't see it, it does not exist. So colleagues, instituting an anti-racist culture will not happen tonight, overnight. It requires action and less words, empathy, creativity, strenuous and unwavering effort, and reflection on how our prevailing culture may have contributed to the current state of affairs. I, for one, am committed to make these changes. I hope you do too. I'd like to thank our colleagues in ECA for hosting this webinar, to the task force team, and to all of you for making time to attend this important event. I wish you all the best. Stay safe and hope to see you again in the other webinars. Bye for now. Thank you very much.